Hi, everybody. I'm Thomas Howard. I'm one of the ICE technical marketing engineers here at Cisco. And today I'm excited to be talking with you about ISE automation with Ansible and trying to do some very practical things with it. This is sort of a basic thing because I think it's going to be introductory for a lot of people, but some of the things we may be doing are a bit intermediate in terms of the experience or what's required to actually pull it off. So I want you to hopefully just kind of take it all in. And then you can always go back and I'm going to give you all the code for everything I'm doing today. So you'll have lots of um, ways to go back and play later on. Uh, Tuesday, I did ICE REST APIs introduction. This is sort of the background on how everything I'm doing here works. I didn't get into Ansible or really into even Python, but this is ultimately how everything is working that you're seeing today. It's all done through REST APIs and a little bit of SSH as well. So if you want to know more about how all this stuff works, I encourage you to go back. We also have some other webinars we've done previously on ICE REST APIs and automation, things like that on our Cisco Learning Network archive, as well as our YouTube channel. So go check those out. So these are the things that I want to be covering today. Not necessarily in this order. I'm going to get you all these things, but not in this order today. We're going to actually do a lot of demos, almost most of everything. But we've got to get going quick because we're going to actually do a live start of ICE and AWS, and that's going to take about 30 minutes. And so I want to make sure we have time for you guys to see it all and to be able to go in and start playing with it after it's live. So we're going to jump right in. So I think automation is interesting and infrastructure is code. We have a WebEx chat room called the ICE Bar that started out of a Cisco live session that Aaron Wolin did many years ago. It's a public space, anybody can join. And it's kind of funny. We have a great group of people in there. I love our partners. And they always have great conversations. And this is one of the ones I really love. So, I always try to promote all the automation and infrastructure as code stuff. And so this one came up. I thought it was really funny. And then somebody, of course, replied, sure, it only takes a few months of learning all this stuff, and then you can actually do something really basic. And so, Damien is an amazing guy. He's a super smart partner, really, really good guy. But he kind of makes a good point, right? Like, I got to do all this stuff before I can do something I could do just in a few minutes that I already know how to do. So, is it really worth learning all this stuff? And so, what I want to kind of convince you guys of today is, everything is about balance. And, you could go out and do something really easy, or you can do something really complex. And of course, it's really easy to over pivot and get a little bit too crazy and too complex in how you do things. And I'm not asking you to do that with the automation stuff, but it wouldn't hurt to do a little bit of it, because I think some things that are quite repetitive, as you're going to see, I know I use this stuff almost every day for what I do. And so being able to automate stuff really saves me a lot of time, makes it predictable and consistent. And so think about that as you go through this. And it's not something you have to, dedicate your next 3 months to learning, but hopefully you can uh, do a little bit more and be a little bit more efficient in your job. So one other thing about this is a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to go do ICE with Ansible or Terraform or whatever, and I'm just going to be able to go build out my amazing infrastructure and have everything automated, do all this wonderful stuff. When really, I think a lot of the reality is that you're given this and you got to go build it. And so part of my goal in doing this is to give you guys a little bit of that vision of what can be done and see how I built it using the building blocks for this. And so what you build with it is up to you, but hopefully you can see how it all kind of ties together. But it does take work to sit down and play. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using an old repository. I've been building and improving it over the months. So this is something that you can actually go get right now in GitHub. And basically, this is what we're going to do today with this repository. This is me. I'm sitting here with my computer in my home office with my lab, and we have my Meraki gear that's connected to the Meraki cloud. And what we're going to do is you're going to watch me install Python and Ansible, and I'm going to use VSCodium, which is like a free open source VS Code by Microsoft. We're going to use that to run a playbook in Ansible, and that playbook is going to launch an AWS VPC, And inside of it, we're going to have a public subnet and a private subnet, and we're going to create some route tables so that things get routed between them. And it's connected through that internet gateway. We're going to instantiate an ISE node in this private subnet. And we're also going to create a Meraki VMX or virtual MX, which is basically like SD-WAN router. And from that, we're going to be able to, unfortunately, we have to wait like 30 minutes for ISE to boot. So we're going to do all this other stuff. And in that time, we're going to create a tunnel all through automation. We're going to build a tunnel. And because ISE takes 30 minutes to boot, I'm actually going to create another little Linux instance that only takes about 1 minute to boot. And I'm just going to use it just to do a ping. I just want to be able to ping from my home network into that private subnet to make sure my VPN tunnel is up and running. And that when that ISE does come up, we're going to be able to connect to it with no problems. So we're going to do that. And then one other little thing is I already created a separate instance where I have my FTP repository out on the internet in AWS connected to an Amazon S3 simple, what's it called? Simple something storage. I keep my backups and my upgrade images and things like that out there. So we're going to try and plug all this together in the next hour. That's the goal. And so with that, I want to jump right into it, and you guys can see how this works. So what I want to do is, this is my GitHub repository that I was just showing you. This is all the code for how I did everything. I did it previously in an earlier ISE with Meraki webinar. And what I've done is I've done a little bit of updating to it. And what I want to do is I'm going to show you how we can just go ahead and run this right now. Oops. I got a little too excited. I need to go into my hack directory. Ansible. And then I think I already have ISE with Meraki. Yeah, I still have it out there. So I want to make sure I get rid of that. I'm not going to use any of that old stuff that I did in testing. Okay, we're good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and pull that repository down. If you don't understand Git and how this works, don't worry, it's okay. But just kind of watch, and hopefully the more you watch and the more videos and things you see, you'll start to understand how it all works. Basically, copied that repository down into my local computer using Git. And now we're going, and we've changed into that directory. And now what we want to do is we want to create a Python environment. For that, we are going to use a series of commands here. Looks like this. So we're going to install Python 3.9. We're going to install Ansible, and then I got to repeat here of Ansible and Ansible. But we're going to install all these other Python packages that are helpful in the things that we're going to be able to do. And then we're going to launch into this environment. So it's a really good idea whenever you're doing any kind of development like this to use a virtual environment. I'm using Pippin. There's others like VMs and things out there. But the idea here is it's easy to start adding code and packages and all this stuff that start to create conflicts. And so it's a really good idea to kind of separate everything out so you don't have any conflicts. And so that's what I'm doing, as I'm using this virtual environment and installing these packages. That's going to let us connect to ISE and do interesting things with Ansible. Okay, so that didn't take very long. That's cool. And the other thing is, once you do launch that virtual environment shell, you're going to see this little thing in parentheses up here. So what that says, and it's in parentheses, it says you're in a virtual environment here. So up here, I wasn't in my virtual environment, but once we activated that virtual environment, it has this thing in parentheses. So now we know we're in a virtual environment. The next thing we're going to do is we want to be able to connect to AWS and ISE and all kinds of stuff using secrets. And so if I look right now at my environment, I got some stuff in there, but nothing too crazy. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to look at my secrets or source them. So I'm going to source my secrets for ISE into here. And what that means is I keep all my passwords and things in the secrets file. I'm going to show you my secrets right now. I would never do this for my AWS credentials or my Meraki credentials, but I'm going to show you what that looks like right now so you can see what I'm talking about. In the interest of learning, right? Education. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to set an ICE username, which is actually going to be overridden from admin to just iseadmin. We're going to set a default password of this. And then I've got some other settings in here that I use for my radius secret and my demos and things. So all that's going to be set up. We're not really going to use any of this other stuff down here, but it's there. So now that that's in my environment, I can actually see it when I do my environment, or I can just do environment and grep ICE underscore, and you can see these are my ICE environment variables that I've configured. So I'm also going to do this for a couple other things. So I want to be able to connect to my FTP repository. So I've got my secrets that I use for initializing the repository in ICE, basically the password and the encryption key and all that kind of stuff. I also have my AWS credentials, and I also have my Meraki credentials. And so basically what these are is these are my API tokens and things like that that I need to be able to connect securely and provision resources in my accounts. So with that, it's now time to, I think what I'm going to do now is I want to go ahead and launch into VS Code, because I want to be able to show you side by side my I want to show you the directories. I want to show you the files, like this is my main playbook, ISE AWS, and I want to be able to show you my terminal. So these are that's my environment. I can go ahead and run my scripts here, give it a little bit more space. And now what we can do is launch this with this. Hopefully that's a large enough font. Let me see if I can make it just a little bit bigger for you guys. That's maybe a little too, I'll stick with that. I think that's the right size. I'm going to run this playbook now. And what I want to do is just focus on what's happening. I want to show you guys the possibilities with these automations. Actually, I want to start it over here. And then we can make it wider. So I'm going to run it right now. So what this is doing is we're going in, we're creating a virtual private cloud in AWS. We're creating the internet gateway. There's the public subnet, the private subnet, route tables, all that good stuff. And it's going to build this out pretty quickly. And if I just quickly switch over to AWS, see, I got some VPCs, and you can see I just created ICE with Meraki in AWS. And if I go look at my EC2 instances, we're actually going to be launching. There's my FTP server. I've got another CMDB server. This is the ICE instance that I'm launching now. If we go back over to VS Code, okay, you can see my ICE instance is launched. This is the private address that's been given inside of that VPC. We've assigned some security groups, all this stuff. And then what we're doing now is we're actually going to be launching that Meraki VMX. And so to do that, we are prompting the user, or us, for a VMX token. So what this is saying is, in order to do this, basically you need the authentication token from Meraki to be able to license this thing. So to do that, we need to go out into Meraki. And here's my Meraki network. So here's my lab. Right now, you don't see the ICE Meraki AWS network, but if I refresh this, because I just created this network using the APIs for Meraki, we'll refresh this. And now I have an ICE Meraki AWS, which I created with that automation. And if I come over here, I can take a look at my appliance status. And it knows I've created this Meraki VMX, but I need to get a token for it. So we're going to go ahead and add that. And you see it's never connected because it's not authenticated with the token. So we're going to generate that token. I'm going to copy it. And now I'm going to plug that right in over here. Oops, I keep going back to that. I want to go to there. I'm just going to paste it and go. And so the cool thing here, what I'll show you is not only are we able to execute a series of steps, we can actually prompt the user for a workflow. So I've been able to do this and give it all to Meraki via APIs. We're now able to create that instance of Meraki VMX in AWS also. And we're going to go ahead and provision that VPN network so I can have my local Meraki MX SD-WAN router connect to the one in AWS. Okay, so now it's prompting me again. So there's a little, I found a problem where I wasn't actually able to add the VPN network via API. This was like a year ago. I just haven't tried to update it since then. So let's see if this will work. Let me, I know this will work, but what I want to do is giving myself instructions. Hey, you need to go do this. Otherwise, your VPN tunnel is not going to come up. So what I want to, and so I'm going to go add this. I'm going to give it a name, the subnet, save it, and then we'll be able to start pinging. So I'm going to hit enter so it continues. And we're going to go back into Meraki. And I'm going to go back here. And this time I'm going to go to that site-to-site VPN like the instructions told me. And I need to add that local network. I basically need to tell it what's the local network that this virtual MX is connecting me to. What's the address range? So this is going to be, we're just calling it ISE Meraki in AWS. And here's that subnet. And we're going to save it. And so once we've done that, changes saved, we can go back in and look at our appliance. And those of you that aren't familiar with Meraki, basically what happens is it still hasn't quite connected yet. And you can see the config is out of date. It hasn't quite applied the config yet. So what we want to do is let's check and see our progress over here. Okay, so now our ping VM is up. That little Linux VM I told you about, it's up. So I'm going to go ahead and try and ping it real quick in a separate window. And it's up. I'm pinging. That means my tunnel's up. And hopefully once my ISE is up, I'll be able to ping it. Actually, it should already be up, at least pingable. Cool. So now I know that I have successfully created my tunnel between ISE and myself, between my home network and AWS, all securely, so I can eventually send radius requests to ISE securely inside of the VPN as well. So that's what I was able to do real quick. And now we just get to sit back, relax, have a coffee, because what you're going to see here is we're just waiting for the ISE GUI to come up now. So I got a little task here that sits and runs. We're just waiting for a connection to the ISE GUI, and we're going to get a HTTP response of 200 once that happens. We know that the application server is initialized, all the other services are up and running as well, and we can begin to basically enable APIs with APIs and be able to start provisioning and doing the configuration of things as well. And you can see that I have also provisioned some Meraki SSIDs on my local access point as well. So all these kinds of things are possible when you start looking at automation using REST APIs. So it's really cool to be able to do stuff like this. And so I wanted to kind of give you guys some ideas of this, of what are some practical things that we can do in terms of these Ansible scripts. So provisioning ISE, provisioning other network devices, provisioning cloud resources. You saw me do an Ubuntu VM up here, provisioning that, connecting them all together so that really quickly I can do all this and I can do a demo for you guys or anybody else. So that's the power of being able to do something like that. And what I want to do now is let's head back to our slides, and then we can learn a little bit more about Ansible, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the playbooks and how do we actually do all of that. But I want to kind of give you guys some background on how that works first. So we have a couple of different types of tools that are available at our disposal with ISE and automation today. We have what are called orchestration tools, and Terraform is probably the best known for that. And this is what's used to do a lot of cloud container type provisioning, Kubernetes, things like that. Um, really, really useful for that. But really, that's all it does is it just kind of provisions stuff. It's not really meant for configuration. That's really where Ansible excels, is doing configuration management. And you just saw me do some of this stuff. You saw me do Linux, ISE, Meraki, VMX, things like that. So uh, the reality, though, isn't that this is all that they do. The reality is that they both kind of do a little bit of each. They have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, but what you actually do with it is really up to you. So I choose to use Ansible because most of where you, a customer, anybody, partner maintaining this is going to spend their time is in the configuration and the maintenance and the ongoing operation of ISE. It's not just provisioning stuff all the time. Yes, you do it, when you maybe do an upgrade or something, or an installation, but really you're going to spend your time on the configuration management. So that's why I'm choosing to use ISE. That's where I'm going to spend my time. The power of it comes in this idea of idempotence, um, meaning that you can run something over and over again and get the same result. So the way this works is, let's say we have a bunch of resources that are all, on our network. And you could think of this like some kind of servers that need upgrading, or who knows, maybe you want to deploy something new. So what happens is when you run on a playbook, the idea is maybe something doesn't need to change at all. Cool, we're good. It's fine. Maybe something just has a little bit of a change, and that's fine. Or maybe something has a lot of changes that has to go through to be upgraded and made consistent with everything else. And then maybe you want to provision something new altogether. And you want it to have that same state, that same end state. And that's really the power of idempotence. So I can run Ansible playbooks over and over again, and I will reach the same state. That's the idea. Uh, and so where we can try to use this is, like I said, in the operation and deployment of ISE. So what you just saw me do is a little bit of provisioning, where I was able to provision VPCs and only a single ISE node, not a lot of them. I could have, but it would take a few extra lines of code and make it happen. Um, then ultimately want to deploy it, where if we have an actual live production ISE deployment, we need to have multiple nodes so that's highly available. Maybe we need to connect it to some load balancers and assign roles and all this kind of stuff. I consider that deploy, and the way I think about it is like it's an ISE deployment. It's everything's connected and working together, right? And you've got some other things that you do with certs and um, licenses and all that kind of stuff. Then comes where you spend most of your time, right? The configuration. You're going to add, remove endpoints and users, and maybe portals and identity stores and all kinds of stuff. That's where you're going to spend your time. Uh, but then there's also an operational aspect of it as well, where you want to see what's going on, sessions, reports, maybe do some things with eventing, um, that kind of stuff. And of course, you have maintenance where you've got to do your patches and upgrades too. And then at some point, you may need to get rid of the whole thing. Maybe it's just a lab instance. You've been playing with it, you're done, you can delete it, or proof of concept or something like that. Or something I want to be able to get to, hopefully in 2023, I want to be able to show you how to have multiple ISE deployments, and we're able to upgrade you from an old ISE deployment to a newer ISE deployment. And then we're going to basically do a backup restore and delete the old deployment, and just everything's running now on the new deployment. So that's where we want to be able to go with this whole thing. So I kind of showed you a little bit of everything here. At least I will by the time we're done, including the destroy. That's the last thing I want to do with this thing today. Is actually, after create, I'm just going to go destroy the whole thing, because I don't want to get charged for these resources I'm using up in the cloud anymore. So hopefully this gives you guys a really good idea of how I think about ISE and automation and all the different kind of the stages we're going to go through and things we can do. So the next thing is I want to talk about serialization. Because when we talk about automation and infrastructure as code, we're trying to take our infrastructure and reduce it down to a series of objects and configurations and things, right? And the way we do this is by having a set of data types that we encode it as, and we put it all together into like a config. And I think this is the one that hopefully everybody here is familiar with, right? This is a form of infrastructure as code configuration, um, where um, we did this years and years ago. Actually, it was probably what, late 1980s, early 1990s, when they built a lot of these configs. And so it's all text based. You can see there's a lot of repeated keywords, and there's a little bit of notion of using spacing to create these indentions that identify some scope. So you know that all those sub commands belong to the previous thing, whether it's an interface or a radius server or something. So that's cool. But we've come a long way the intervening, like 30 years or so. So the way we see things today with ICE is we have a GUI, but you can also do REST APIs that return XML with ICE. But really, that's really the old way of doing things. That's like a very 1990s way of doing things, all that XML markup language stuff. So now today, a lot of the cool kids are doing JSON. This is how a lot of most, if not all, of your REST APIs deliver their serialized representation of a resource. It's using JSON. And so thankfully we can say goodbye to XML. We don't want to deal with that ever again. JSON's kind of won over that. But all this cloud, uh, container, Kubernetes stuff, it's really given rise to YAML, which is YAML ain't markup language. That's what YAML means. And hopefully you can see how it seems much cleaner in its representation, much simpler. You don't have all the curlies and the quotes. You can put quotes around strings still, but it's not too crazy. And it does use indentation to note scope. And the really cool thing about YAML above JSON is it does comments. Can't do comments in JSON. That's a really annoying part of it. And so this is why when you're talking about documenting your infrastructure as code, the ability to provide comments and explain to others or to remind yourself of why you did something, having comments is really important. So YAML's kind of one out there. Ansible uses YAML for the configuration and its playbooks and things. And so I want to spend some time to go through what that looks like, how it works. So this isn't actually a playbook. This is just a definition of a network device in ICE represented as YAML. And so first of all, we start with a YAML document. It begins with 3 dashes. That notates a new document. And by the way, the file is either a .yml or .yaml file. Comments begin with a hashtag, simple enough at the beginning of the line. And what we're doing is we're creating what's called a map or a dictionary or a hash. Basically, that has a key value pair. And in this case, we have a key, which is network devices, and it maps to a sequence. And the sequence is notated by the dashes, the individual dashes. That's basically a new record, a new item in the sequence that we're going to be. So we have 2 network devices that we can see here. There might be more, but it's scrolled off the page, so we don't know if there's more. But we have at least 2 here that we can see, lab MR461 and lab MR462. So it's an ordered sequence. Whenever you see a sequence, it's always ordered. So that's important because if you iterate through it, it's going to come out in a specific order. And then you can see that we have a series of dictionary keys in here. So we have name mapping to lab MR46. We have a description mapping to a null string, profile name, network device IP list. We have all these different things. And so we even have network device IP list mapping to another sequence. There's only one item in the sequence, but it happens to be another map. And so you can see how we can do all these different things. We can map to a sequence of strings. This one, it's a map to another map. And we can map to an integer, which represents our change of authorization port value. And one other detail is notice that I can actually do an inline comment. It begins with anything that has, basically, if there's any kind of a white space followed by a hashtag, that becomes the comment also. Somebody pointed out to me that, see if I can do this. This is a comment because it's got a space in front of it, one or more spaces. But this is not a comment because it doesn't have a space in front of it. So this is interpreted as a full string. If I were to put a space between location and a hashtag, that would, all locations would instantly become a comment. So there's little details like that you got to watch for. But this is basically how a YAML document works. And one other thing I want to show you is if I wanted to reference something in a config, because I want to be able to manipulate this data, use this data, if I want to reference it, we use this notation to get that value out of it. So basically, whenever you see something in Ansible, to represent a variable, it's surrounded by curly braces, double curly braces, and then we have um, that top level network devices, and you can see it's the 0th or the first item in the list, and then we want to get the next object in there, that next dictionary entry, which is network device um, IP list, and then we want to get the IP address. So we go to network device IP list, IP address, and we get that value. So that's how we're able to reference it. So you can do this for pretty much any item in this data structure, this data serialization. So that's how YAML works. And whenever you want to run a playbook using a YAML, it looks like this. So pretend this is you, kind of like what I was doing when I set this up. You're considered the control node, and Ansible actually has this other platform where you can run all this stuff from. If, especially you have like a team of people all working together, you don't want to put it on your individual computers. You kind of want to keep it all centralized, and you can run your playbooks from that central place. But we're gonna, like we did, we installed Python because that's how Ansible runs. Ansible is built on Python, so you must have Python. And Python, Ansible relies on something called collections. These are basically little software packages that have been written that you can use to do functions on these different products. So in this case, some of the Cisco's, we have lots of other Cisco ones, DNAC, iOS, ISE, Meraki. We have these playbooks, these modules that you can use to build your playbooks to do interesting things. And so that's what we do is we build out a playbook, and it will also have an inventory. Now the inventory, actually, let me step back to the playbooks real quick. Playbooks basically define a series of hosts or one or more hosts that you're going to run this playbook against. You can have variables, you can have tasks, you can have something called roles. And in it, basically, you're just running an ordered list of tasks built on those modules from the Galaxy collection. And it's going to let you do stuff, whether it's create a AWS VPC, or whether it's instantiate a new ISE node, or define a repository in ISE, define a network device, define a user, delete a user, whatever you want to do, right? That's kind of what's happening with these tasks. And then the inventory defines what hosts or computers or nodes that you want to run this playbook against. Because maybe you have different environments. Maybe you got your lab environment, maybe you've got a staging environment, maybe you have a production environment. I have different demo environments, and so I can run these different same playbooks on different hosts or different ISE nodes. So that's what the inventory is for. And ultimately, you're trying to manage some nodes. And when you do that, Ansible was built. Ansible was basically owned by Red Hat, and so it's an open source effort too. But they're the ones that really created it because they want to help their customers manage their Linux instances, and Ansible is the way to do it. So it usually works by connecting to Linux instances over SSH and then provisioning them, configuring them, updating packages, all that kind of stuff. There's lots of modules available to manage Linux-y type things. And so you can create, like in this case, a group of web servers and manage them consistently and do that idempotent package management configuration to keep all the web servers consistent, right, and up to date. You can also do Windows servers. It doesn't use SSH because Windows, so you got to use WinRM to do that. And but you can do the same thing with Active Directory servers or even regular workstations. You can connect to those and maintain those. In the case of ISE, we actually use REST APIs. So we have different transport mechanisms for connecting and managing these different things. But everything I just did to launch my ISE node and what I'm going to do to configure it is all done over REST. And what you saw in the case of provisioning my AWS VPC and the Meraki resources, that was all done via REST as well. So there's different transports available, but it's all kind of hidden underneath all the modules. All that you have to do is make sure that you set up either your SSH credentials so that you can connect to those resources, or your username password for Windows, or your username password for REST, or your tokens for Meraki or AWS. So it's all kind of the same thing that we're using. It's kind of the same, but a little bit different with each thing. Just depends on the resource. All right. Oh, and also localhost. That's another one. So sometimes you don't run these things on other things. You actually use your localhost to run something. So when you saw me doing my wait, I'm actually polling from my local workstation. I'm polling my ISE node to see if it's up and available yet. And I don't think it is. Let's go just give it a quick check over here. 906. Yeah, we got a ways to go still. Okay, let's get back to our presentation. So these are all of the Ansible collections that you have at your disposal today. I'm sure they're always growing and changing. If you look for the Cisco stuff, these are all the ones we have for Cisco, and you can see the one for ISE in there as well. And there are some other ones that I typically use. So I had to use some of the Amazon AWS things. I also use some of the Ansible net common. That's actually what I'm going to be using to show you the CLI commands a little bit later. A lot of Ansible built-in things like tools, utilities, Ansible POSIX. That's for doing, that one is for, I want to say keys or something like that, SSH keys or something. And we have other Ansible utilities. Azure, I know we just released ISE on Azure, so there's your Azure AZ collection if you want to use Azure with this. And then there's also a bunch of community type packages that other people have built and contributed for doing lots of things. You can see there's just a ton of things out there available. So maybe you're using VMware or something, so you can, there's a community VMware. There's also a VMware one as well. But sometimes people, the vendors don't always create everything that the community wants. So they go build their own. That's the beauty of it. And community general has a lot of really good utilities as well. So these are the things that I typically use. When we build an Ansible project, on the left-hand side, you see kind of the basic files, the minimal files required. When you start to get a little bit more advanced, it can get a little crazier, like over on the right-hand side. So you still have your Ansible configuration file. This basically tells Ansible which inventory are you going to be using, and some different options for how you want to display your output. Do you want it to output as JSON or YAML, or do you want to do some timing with all your different tasks? There's different ways you can configure it. Where do you want your log files to go? All that kind of stuff. Pretty basic. Your inventory might start off as a single static hosts file, but very quickly it can get a lot crazier depending on how many different environments you have. So I typically have one for my local host, and then I have one for whatever other environment I'm talking to. So in this case, it's AWS. This is actually a little plugin that they have for AWS. It will actually get my inventory dynamically based on the instances that I have running in my AWS environment that I'm authorized to. And I can filter those down by groups and tags and names and all kinds of good stuff. That's pretty cool. I'm going to show you guys that. The other thing is roles. So roles are really a really nice way of packaging up state. So what happens is it basically takes a bunch of tasks and variables and templates and all these other things and puts them into a role. This is a bit of an advanced topic. We're not going to get into this, but the idea of a role is you can actually assign a role to something, and it would just magically provision all the cool stuff that you need. And it's a really nice way of compartmentalizing and packaging things up to keep it independent. We're not going to get there today. We will eventually in the future with other demos and things. But just know that it's out there and you hear about it. Vars. So you may have a simple variables file called vars, but what really ends up happening is you end up getting a bunch of different ones. Maybe this is where you actually specify your infrastructure as code. I actually am going to have several for specifying my network devices and my internal users and my repositories and things like that. And then some people have one for what credentials they're going to use. They load their environment variables into their credentials file, and those can be used for your other tasks. And then I actually specified things like my AWS VPCs, a bunch of my radius passwords, things like that in my main YAML file. We'll take a look at that. And then you can have a series of playbooks that you want to run. Instead of having a single playbook, you're going to have a bunch of different ones. that's kind of how it's organized. I'm going to go show you that here in a bit. But what I wanted to show you is that the whole real inspiration for this was how to use automation for network automation. So Sean Cavanaugh is one of the teamies for Red Hat. He did a great YouTube video that really helps like think about how do you want to get started with this. And I thought this was something. Don't just take my word for it, my examples, because I'm sure you guys manage a lot more than just ICE. But if you want to go see how you can do other things with routers and switches and other things, go take a look at this video. It's really good. He talks about how you can start doing, low risk tasks like backups or reading configs and kind of manipulating data, or then start out maybe doing scope config management. So maybe you are going to update a config, but it's just a little part of it. Maybe I might push a banner or something like that. You're not going to go, do a .1x config on an interface right away. Or maybe you have a series of things that you typically do when you're troubleshooting something. How can you automate that into a workflow? And then ultimately, you would have some kind of really cool automated process for deploying a branch office or something like that. You could do a complete workflow. So these are some ideas on how you can do it. And what I want to do is kind of go through and show you some of this, where I want to show you how I'm launching, I'm provisioning, I'm actually going to do configuration, I'm going to do queries, and hopefully you saw how I'm running all this in a single playbook that automates it from beginning to end. That's what you're seeing in my demo. So let's get back to the demo. All right, so it's still going. We got a little bit of time still. So what I want to do is time check, 15 minutes. Okay, let's see if we can get this done in 15 minutes. We are going to look at some code. So here is that directory structure I talked about earlier. So here's my Ansible config file. Let me move this out of the way. Really simple. Like I said, it specifies my inventory. In this case, I have my inventory in an inventory directory, which is up here. There's my two files I talked about, my localhost. I put a big header in here, so if you guys are looking at my code, you can kind of see some interesting things about how this works. And if you want to know more, you can go look at these links. Basically, the main reason I have this is because when you talk to your local host, it's a local connection. You want to flag it to Ansible so it knows it's my local host. I use the local connection. In the case of AWS EC2, this is also a YAML file, and I'm using the EC2 plugin. And you can see this is where I'm able to specify what is my access key and secret key that I'm pulling from my environment. Remember, I sourced it into my environment earlier. I'm pulling this data in. I'm using this when I do an Ansible inventory query. It's using those credentials. I can specify what regions I want to be able to query. And if you don't specify this, the query takes a long time. So it's a really good idea to just specify what regions you're using. And then ultimately, what's really cool is I can create these different key groups. Really, really awesome to be able to know what are my different resources that I can access. How can I slice and dice my infrastructure? I'll show you some examples of that here in a little bit. And then whenever I reference my host, do I want to do it by the name I give them, by the IP address, the DNS name? And whenever I reference it in a playbook, what IP address how do I want to do it? Do I want to do it by public IP, private IP, by a name? How do I want to reference it in my playbooks? We'll hopefully get to that here in a little bit. So what I want to show you is I can't use this terminal over here because it's in use right now. So what I want to do is I want to come over to a new terminal, and let's see if we can do an inventory query with Ansible. So let's go here, and hopefully I have I should have sourced everything here. So I should be able to do an Ansible inventory. And I want to look at it by graph. Cool, there it is. So check this out. What it did is it looked at my inventory, and it says, okay, Thomas, you have AWS EC2 resources, and these are your 5, basically my instances. So I've got a configuration management database, an FTP server. I have my ICE node, my ping node, and my VMX. Those are all the ones that are out there. I can organize it by the instance type. I've got one C5X large, which is my VMX, my Meraki VMX. I've got a product called ICE. It's that one ICE node. If I had multiple ICE nodes, it would have a list of those, hopefully. And then I have another one I've called Nginx. That's my Nginx server. That's my configuration management database. I've got a VMX, an FTP server. You're running VSFTPD. And then I can also group, I call it a project. Some people call it an environment. I call it a project. I called it ISE Meraki AWS. These are all of my instances that are running in this project. So you guys saw me create the ICE, the ping node, and the VMX. Those are all of my instances running in that project. I have one that's my PX Grid Direct configuration management database. There's only one of those, my FTP server. And then these are my T2 micro instances. So instance type again. I have another instance type, T3X large, that's my ICE, and on down the line, right? So you can see how I can now slice and dice my inventory, my hosts, by either these keyed groups, or I can reference them individually by their individual names. So that's kind of cool to be able to do that depending upon how you want to slice your infrastructure. So for example, if you only wanted to operate on things in a specific Amazon region, you can see here's the 1B region and here's the 1A region. So there's that. Let's get back to here. The next thing is, let's show you, that's inventory vars. Let's start with vars. So I told you about the main YAML file. So this is a YAML file, and you can see this is where I specified my project name. Oh, dang it. I didn't do my, I forgot. I got all excited. I didn't do my domain name. So I commented this out because not everybody may have a domain, so I commented out, but I really wanted to have my domain name available to make it convenient. But oh well, hopefully we'll just connect via the internal IP address. I have some other network resources I want to specify, my region, time zones. You can see I am pulling my ICE username and password from my environment variables. Same thing with my radius secrets. I don't want to show those normally to everybody in the world. I don't want to commit this to GitHub. I want to be able to pull it out of my environment. And so that's how I can do it. When you specify your Meraki stuff, you got to provide an organization name and what network name do you want to give it, or your lab name. What is the CIDR network that you want to be able to assign to that as well. So these are some of the presets that I want to give for my tasks. Same thing with my AWS VPCs. I can specify a region in my environment variables, or I can just default it to one that I know I use. And you could edit this for yourself and do it the same. What is my CIDR address that I want to be using for my VPCs, all that kind of stuff. And then my Linux VM, and finally my ICE. So in the case of my ICE, I can have more than one ICE node. I commented out the other one if I wanted to have like a secondary, but I can choose what ICE image I want to run. Do I want to run 3.1 patch 1? Do I want to run 3.2? What size instance? I'm running the evaluation demo size instance, the T3 extra large, and it only costs me 20 cents a minute. And what is my internal IP address? When I could specify a public one potentially, if I had, a public IP address that I could assign to it through AWS. And then what persona do I want to run? I could determine what services I want to run, and then I have to run a series of playbooks to actually provision it. That's going to be the subject of the webinar next month that I do, showing you guys how that works. So there's that. Another interesting thing that we could do is CLI. So this is something interesting. I wrote a little playbook to connect with that Ansible Net Common connection for doing ICE CLI commands. So let's see if we can run that really quick before our. I want to see if we can get this guy somewhere. I think this thing is about ready to go off here real soon. I can finish the configuration. So let me go here, and I want to just watch and see when it does go off. Oh, I got another one there. I want to see that. There we go. What we want to do is, let's see if we can run this command. So I'm going to run this playbook with ISE CLI exec. If I don't specify anything, it should just go off and do a show version. There it is. So I was able to go run a CLI command and get the data back. And now if I wanted to go parse this and manipulate it somehow and use that information, I could totally do that. The other thing I can do is I can send, the way I did is I send an environment variable in. So it's kind of an ugly command line, but ultimately what I'm doing is show application status ICE. So I'm sure you guys have done this a lot before too. So I'm going to go ahead and run this command, and it takes a little bit to run. But the idea is I can run this without having to invoke an SSH session. It's just a one-off I want to do. Or I could incorporate this into one of my Ansible playbooks, and I could grab this data that maybe I wanted to see, is the ICE application server up and running yet? I could use this command to do it instead. So you can see application server still initializing, and that's, corroborated over here. So not quite there yet. Maybe we want to do it again and see if it's coming up anytime soon. Got 5 minutes left. It's got to come up fast. No, dang it. It was that domain name problem. Dang it. Okay. So I was worried about that. So what we're going to do really quick, I always run it with the domain name. I didn't troubleshoot my code to solve for that. So let's do this. Let's go back here, and I'm going to rerun. I'm going to show you guys idempotency on the fly right now. I'm going to go into, what was it, my vars file, main, and I'm going to remove that comment, save it. I'm going to rerun this playbook right now. And unfortunately, it's going to go through all these steps, but it should be fast because the instances have all been created. I don't have to wait for ICE anymore. And should go through pretty quick. Route tables take a little bit of time, but otherwise everything should just knock off really, really fast compared to what it was the first time. And I even put a little thing in so that if I rerun it with Meraki VMX, it won't prompt me for my token again. So that should be good. All right. So hopefully you can see it's going to go through. We've already done that. I just hit enter, keep going. Team VM's already created. So it's able to detect whenever there's no change necessary. Okay, creating those Meraki SSIDs again. It says change. There really shouldn't be any change. That would in an ideal world that's how it would work, but it says that it's changed. Okay, so now we're enabling the ICE REST APIs. We're configuring the repositories. I'm configuring some radius probes on internal users. I'm going to go through and create some internal user accounts. So I read them in, and now I'm provisioning a bunch of users. These are all of our TMEs. Now I'm creating some network devices. I'm actually taking my Meraki inventory, its IP addresses. I'm pushing it out to ICE right now. Got some network devices, got some endpoint groups, some endpoints. So I'm provisioning all of these right now. Some things take a little longer than others. And there we go, ICE is ready. Cool. Okay, now, if all goes well, I should be able to, because I have my domain name this time, There it is, trustzero.net on my domain. Accept and continue. Cool, there it is. So provisioned it all, and the other thing I want to do really quick is let me go in and I want to log in because I want to show you that it created everything. Now, because this is the first time we're logging in with ISE 3.2 in a cloud instance, it's going to prompt us to reset our password. All right, so I got to reset my password here really quick. Oh, come on. Did I get it right? All right, I got my password right. And let's do, all right, now because I changed my super admin password, it should prompt me that, by the way, you're going to need to go change any automation scripts that you're also running. And so I can say, oh, thank you very much. I know that now. And so if I do run any more automations, I just need to make sure that I update my my secrets. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to source. I've already pre-programmed it in another secrets file called ISE AWS. All right, so now if I run any more scripts, I'll have it there. But the only other thing I want to show you is that there's the endpoints that I created, my network devices that were my Meraki devices that I provisioned, that it knows about. It magically provisioned those for me. And my users are down here as well. All right, there's all my users that I provisioned. So that means I should be able to just now authenticate with those SSIDs I created. So I'm going to pull out my phone here and I'm going to go to that corp network and I should be able to simply authenticate. Why isn't that working? Unable to join. I don't know what I did wrong. I'm going to forget it and try again. I really want to show you guys that it's going to let me. It's got everything provisioned, so I can just go do this really quick. Try. I might have had some bad credentials for a different demo cached. Oh, I missed out on something. Oh, wait, it worked. There it is. It's going to take a little bit. It'll come through. It totally worked. There it is. Yay, it worked. Okay, so I was able to authenticate. So hopefully you can see my default. It worked with my internal user really quick. So I just wanted to show you guys that really cool thing. I know we're over time. Now I want to do one last thing, which is destroy everything I just built. Um, again, trying to show you some more automations. So I'm going to run Ansible Playbook, and I want to run ISE in AWS terminate. This is now going to destroy everything I just built. It's going to go through and run. It's going to say, and we're only going to do it for this project. I don't want to destroy all my resources, only the things I did for this demo. So I'm going to filter on those resources that I tagged. It's going to gather up everything. It's going to say, okay, Thomas, you built 3 EC2s, 1 VPC, a couple of subnets, all this stuff. You sure you want to delete it? And I'm going to say yes. And now it's going to start doing it. And if we go look at AWS, EC2 instances, not running, everything. You can see it's now shutting down those resources I created. Now I can save money. Now that my demo's over, I'm not going to keep giving Amazon money. So I'm going to save that and go do something else instead. So last thing I want to share with you guys is Ansible has this month, they have their AnsibleFest coming up, October 18 to 19. A lot of really good sessions. So I recommend if this is something that interests you, it's perfect timing. They have stuff recorded online from previous ones, or you can go wait to watch the YouTube videos after this one's done. And finally, before you go, please tell us in the survey what you guys would like to see in the future. I tried to give you some inspiration this time to show you all the different things you could do. But what would you like to deep dive on in the future? You want to do upgrades, patching, certificates, load balancers. You want to see some wired .1x configuration, all that. And the next one we're going to do next month, automated provisioning and patching. So hopefully that'll give you some more inspiration for how that's going to work. And then we have our usual resources.